We're very privileged because we've got a special guest joining us this morning, and a true privilege to have him here. His name is Chuck Neighbors, and he's been traveling the world for many years, more than 17 countries, performing. He's a famous actor and storyteller, and it'll be a unique experience for us this morning, something a little different from what we are used to, but I know we'll enjoy it together this morning. He has spoken in churches, gyms, airplane hangars, and even on board a submarine. He traveled by helicopter to the mountains in Korea and performed for our men and women in the armed forces. So lots of great stories to share with us this morning. He and his wife Laurie live in Salem, Oregon. They have 3 growing sons, and we're going to find out a bit about their family this morning as he performs for us and shares with us some of what's on his heart. He's also been a part of a great organization that we'll tell you a bit about later. It's called Food for the Hungry. So church, would we give the warmest of Horizon welcomes to one of our new dear friends, Chuck Neighbors.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and good morning. Hey, that's pretty good. Sometimes I say good morning to a congregation, they look back as if to say, prove it. So I enjoy getting a little response to that greeting. It's a pleasure to be here and to share with you today. If you happen to have seen me perform before, you know that I mostly do one-man shows that are theatrical in nature. But more recently, I've ventured into this area of personal storytelling with a presentation that I introduced a few years ago called Truth Be Told, from a guy who makes stuff up. And I discovered, I really enjoyed this more personal approach to storytelling that I call life stories. So I was chatting with a friend of mine, talking about my next project, and told him I was kind of looking for some ideas. He suggested that I write a show about being a dad. I gave him that proverbial deer caught in the headlights look. You see, I just finished sharing with my friend an update on my family, some personal stories that had a little bit of heartache and struggle in them about my feelings as a father. Oh, I think I have more questions than answers on that topic. My friend said, that's why you should do it. But at the moment, I'm not feeling like I did all that good a job of being a father. My friend said, that's why you should do it. But these stories, they're not even finished yet. My friend said, that's why you should do it. My friend was trying to make a point. Well, a couple of points, actually. One is we're all living stories. And our stories won't be over while we can still draw a breath of life on this earth. If I waited to tell these stories, it might be too late. And 2, one of the greatest purposes in telling our stories is that people will identify with them. My friend felt that some of the trials and struggles that I'd gone through in being a dad would resonate with people in my audiences, people like you. I found the idea both compelling and terrifying. Being a dad. I didn't exactly write the manual on that topic, and really nothing you can read can totally prepare you for the reality of what it truly means to be a father. One of the first things you discover is that much of your training for this job came from your father, who was trained by his father. If you want a sneak peek at what your kids might be like when they grow up, look in the mirror. The reality of this really hit me the day I realized just how much of what I say in raising my kids were the same things that my own father said. Were you born in a barn? And for crying out loud, because I said so, don't make a sound. You've got a roof over your head. These are a few of the things my dad said. I'll give you something to cry about. Let mom kiss it better. You'll live, don't you pout. There are no monsters under your bed. These are some more of the things my dad said. Oh, for Pete's sake, clean up your plate. Don't wear stripes with plaid. I find I'm repeating the things my dad said, and sometimes I think that's sad. Don't make me come in there. I've had it bend over. I won't say it again. I'll pull this car over. Stop picking your nose. Your brains will fall out. These are the things that I'm talking about. They jump off a cliff, would you do it too? Say, please excuse me, don't forget thank you. Go comb your hair, don't make a fuss, close the barn door. Remember to flush. Ask your mother. Pull my finger. You're gonna make me mad. I find I'm repeating the things my dad said. But I ask you, is that so bad? remember asking one of my boys to say the blessing before the meal. He was about 5 years old at the time, and he closed the blessing with this phrase: "Bless this food to the nourishment of our bodies, and our bodies to thy service. In Jesus' name, amen." Bless this food to the nourishment of our bodies, and our bodies to thy service, from a 5-year-old. Guess where he learned that phrase? From me. Guess where I learned it? From my dad. A few others, maybe you recognize some of these. "Clean up your plate. Kids are starving in Africa." I always wondered how my cleaning up my plate would help those starving kids. I would have gladly given up my allowance to send my Brussels sprouts to Africa. "Dad, blame it, and doggone it," was my dad swearing. I rarely heard him say anything vulgar, and taking God's name in vain was worse than swearing in our house. And if you said, "Oh my God," you had better be praying. "Don't make me come in there. Don't make me pull this car over," was our warning that we were about to get a spanking. None of this "I'm going to count to 3" stuff from my dad. One warning was sufficient, and I don't think the timeout was invented yet. But he was not abusive, and the spankings were mostly earned, although I didn't think so at the time. When I asked my boys what phrases they remembered the most from growing up in the house with me as their dad, "You've got a roof over your head" was pretty high on their list. My dad would use that whenever we would complain about not having the latest toys or clothes or anything else that would inspire our envy. And a close second in the roof category was, "Not while you're living under my roof, you won't." All these phrases handed down over the years, I can just hear my ancient ancestor somewhere in Europe. "Don't maketh me pulleth this carriage over, laddie. Pulleth my finger, Johnny." And I imagine a few of those ancestors really were born in a barn. My wife accuses me of giving non-committal answers to questions. She may be right. If so, it's definitely something that I learned from my dad. One of his favorite responses to almost any yes or no question was, "I reckon." Sort of his way of saying whatever. If you wanted a definitive answer to your question, you could count on "go ask your mother." I reckon that's one of his favorites that I repeat to this day. When my dad was asked at his 50th wedding anniversary what was his secret to a long marriage, his response: "In every argument, always have the last words." And those words? "Yes, dear." It was a joke, but in his case, it was mostly true. All of these phrases handed down over the years, and think about both the positive and negative reinforcement of such repeated phrases. As I was preparing to write this, I did a little polling of some of my friends on Facebook. I asked for them to submit things that their dad said, funny, cliche, or weird. There was a lot of responses, and I was amazed at how many people submitted the same phrases. But there was one response from a friend that troubled me a little. She said, nothing he ever said was funny, cliche, or weird. Only mean, abusive, and ugly. Sad and profound. The lasting impacts of the things that we say and the effects that they can have on our kids. It can raise up and inspire a child to greatness, or it can cut and scar a child for life. Repeating the things our parents say, it's one of the ways that we learn to fit in this world. We hear them say things, we repeat, recycle, imitate. The desire to be just like everybody else around us starts in the home and quickly branches out from there. So, you ready to hear some of my stories? First, a little disclaimer. The stories that you're about to hear are true. The names have not been changed to protect the innocent, nor have the facts been altered to protect the guilty. All living named parties have given their consent for me to share these stories and to talk about them behind their backs. From the very beginning of their young lives, we've always taken our kids to church. In the early years when they were young, they would usually be in the nursery during the worship service. Yes, going to church was a cheap date for Lori and I, free babysitting. One particular service, I don't remember why, but the nursery was not available. So Lori and I were forced to keep our firstborn, Jonathan, with us during the worship service. Now, Jonathan was just at that age of beginning to learn the difference between his inside voice and his outside voice. He was an active little fellow, wiggling and squirming, and managing to escape more than once underneath the pew in front of us. We had a difficult time controlling him, still managing to somehow listen to the sermon. It's clear that Jonathan wasn't listening. Or was he? The pastor was just making this point about how we as Christians are to be different, to be set apart, to be in this world, but not of this world. At least I think that's the point that he was making. Jonathan, be still. I do remember the pastor's rhetorical question. So, Do you want to be a follower of Jesus Christ or just one of the guys? Jonathan, in one of the clearest statements of his young life, yells out, "Just one of the guys!" A sea of heads turns to stare at us, and then a burst of laughter erupts from the congregation. The pastor, apparently the only person who did not hear what Jonathan said, asked, "What? What did I miss?" Jonathan, enjoying the newfound attention he was suddenly receiving, yelled out even louder, "Just one of the guys!" as Lori and I shrink and attempt to join him underneath the pew in front of us. I doubt that anybody remembers anything about that service except for the phrase, "just one of the guys." You know, we all want to fit in. Being different from those around us isn't always an easy thing to do. If a friend jumps off a cliff, does that mean you do it too? As a parent, sometimes you find out that your child's answer to that question is yes. I've always taken the verse in Proverbs chapter 22, verse 6 to heart. It's the verse that every Christian parent quotes whenever they begin to see the first signs of rebellion in their children. You know the verse, don't you? "Train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he's old, he will not depart from it." My own parents quoted this verse whenever any of us showed signs of straying from the straight and narrow path laid out before us. It's the most hopeful verse that I have to cling to as I watch my own children head towards that cliff in their attempts to be just one of the guys. I'll post it on Facebook. I'll find it on Google. Send you a text. Tweet pictures of poodles. Please read this blog on the life that I've led. These are some things that my dad never said. Ah, yes, technology. Not something that my dad was very adept at. I mean, if he had to make a phone call, he would often ask Mom to dial the number for him. And for most of his years, that was a phone with a literal dial on it. I, on the other hand, have learned to adapt. It's one of the ways I've been able to keep tabs on my boys over the years. If my kids ever make a list of the things that their dad said, some of those phrases will likely be on it. Well, except for that part about tweeting pictures of poodles. I mean, one must draw a line somewhere. But most of those other phrases have found their way onto the list of things that parents say these days. As a parent, have you ever found yourself saying, "Not my kid," or "My kid would never do that"? If you have, then sooner or later you will eat those words. Parents, especially Christian parents, and particularly Christian parents involved in ministry, have this crazy notion in their head that their little cherubs would never do the unthinkable. After all, we're raising them right, taking them to church. We even pray before our meals, and when we tuck them in at night, not our kids, right? Yet there's this nasty little warning that I remember hearing as a kid. Preachers' kids are the worst. For most of my experience, that seems to be the case. Well, except for Pastor Bob's kids. I'm sure they're a rare exception. I dated a pastor's daughter for a while. That's all I'm going to say about that. Kids rebelling is as old as the history of the world. From Cain and Abel to the prodigal son to even Billy Graham's son Franklin, perhaps the most famous preacher's kid of our day, was known for a time as a rebel. Now, while I'm not a preacher in the traditional sense of the word, I am involved in public ministry. So the expectation seems to apply to me as well. Now, to be honest, I don't think that preachers' kids are any different from any other kids. But since they live in the same fishbowl as their parents, we have higher expectations from them. It's not fair. Lori and I were invited to attend a Christian conference, a conference for people involved in ministry in Atlanta, Georgia. Jonathan, our oldest, was 17 at the time, and almost old enough to be trusted to take care of his younger brothers, Ryan and Liam. Almost, but not quite. So Lori and I enlisted a family friend, Sarah, to care for the cherubs while we were away for 4 nights. Now, Sarah informed us that there would be one night when she wouldn't be able to be there due to a previous commitment. But other than that, she was happy to help. One night. Well, Jonathan could handle one night. I mean, after all, he was 17. He was almost an adult. He'd been the babysitter. We were good to go. We had a terrific conference, and we called every day to check in with Sarah to see if things were going okay. Other than one minor incident of one of the hamsters dying and being eaten by the other hamster, don't ask, things were going great. The one night that Sarah had to be away was the night before we were to return home. Details of that night began to unfold slowly. How we found out those details is a carefully guarded family secret. My kids would likely pay good money to find out our sources, but I'll not be revealing them here. We've invoked the witness protection clause of parenting. But on that one night, our home became the scene of, well, what's almost become cliche in any Hollywood coming-of-age movie, the house party. All those scenes of teenage debauchery depicted in those films took place underneath our roof in Salem, Oregon. From the details we were able to piece together, there was, well, not just one party, but two, as both of our older sons hosted their own parties in separate areas of our house. Yes, there was underage drinking. Yes, there was smoking, and not just tobacco. And there were other activities that cannot be discussed in a family setting. Now, most movies that depict such parties show the parents coming home to a trashed house. But our boys, bless their hearts, they were good. The house was in good order. They managed to keep the smoking outside so there was no lingering odor, and they at least had enough good training from their mother to know how to clean up a house. As the details of the evening began to trickle in, so did the names. And we were taking names. You know, I've often thought if I could pick another profession private, I would be pretty high on the list. Lori and I were good, very good at assembling information. Technology. The names were collected and carefully recorded by my uber-organized wife. These kids, these obvious bad influences on our cherubs were now on file in a special Rolodex. We had names, we had numbers, we even had AOL chat screen names. This Rolodex would soon become well known not only to our kids, but to their friends and to the friends of their friends. This Rolodex has a name that lives in infamy to this very day, the Nolodex. These are the kids that we would say no to. We would carefully keep these kids away from our kids. After all, these kids, they were obviously the non-church-going kids, right? I mean, their parents were probably gangsters, outlaws, and former hippies. Not exactly. Turned out there were some kids from respectable families in the community on the Nolodex. There were some kids from our church on the Nolodex. There were even some pastors' kids on the Nolodex. For the most part, these were all kids that we assumed were good kids, just like ours. Just like ours. Just like ours. Slowly, it began to dawn on us that maybe our kids, no, not our kids. Yes, our kids were the bad influences. Suddenly we began to realize that probably every other parent in town was creating their own Nolodex, and carefully recorded underneath the letters in were the name John Neighbors and Ryan Neighbors. Looking back, we laugh some, we cringe a lot. It was a blow to the system. You know, despite of all their training up, our kids had made a name for themselves. Not under my roof. I wanted to scream, but it was too late. The space underneath my roof had been desecrated. You know, this is probably the single most significant moment that would confirm my feelings of failure as a father. How could this happen? Where did I go wrong? Was this my fault? You know the story of Abraham and Isaac in the Bible, right? Abraham is asked by God to do the unthinkable. God tells him to sacrifice his son. But as you read the entire story, you realize that God never really intended for Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. The scriptures say that God was testing him. Now, most tests are to prove to somebody else that we have a given skill set or ability. Think of a test in school or a driving test. But this test was not to convince God that Abraham's faith was strong. God knew that, but Abraham didn't know. The test was to convince Abraham that his faith was strong. In the end, God intervened and provided a lamb for Abraham to sacrifice, sparing his son. You know, sometimes I think that being a parent is a lot like being tested by God in this way. I need to prove to myself that I truly trust God. Sometimes I think God may just be waiting and watching to see how long it takes me for me to realize that I do have the faith. These stories aren't finished yet. I'm still being tested on that one. You may have heard of something called middle child syndrome. It's when a middle child, typically in a family of 3 children that are close in age, feels left out or neglected. According to my research, the firstborn is typically an overachiever, and they're sometimes perceived as the most important with the most privileges. The younger sibling is the baby of the family and gets away with more, as well as being the most looked after. Middle child syndrome starts when the middle child is squeezed between these two and has trouble finding his or her niche in the family. Middle children sometimes misbehave to get attention. Check. Be less parent dependent than their siblings. Check. Become the loner of the family and not participate in family events unless told to. Check. Be more likely to go to a friend for advice than to a parent. Check. And be very creative. Check. In short, it's where the older child appears to get all of the awards, the younger appears to get all of the love, and the middle appears to get nothing. It's not necessarily true, but that's the perception. That's what my research told me. My son Ryan might just have a little bit of middle child syndrome. He would pass most of those tests that I just described. Ryan was our troublemaker. He was a child that would get suspended from school and have the reputation of class clown. He was a child that would sneak out of the house in the middle of the night and be brought home by the police bloodied from a beating. He was our rebel without a cause. He was the child that I would butt heads with over and over and over again. Now, to Lori and I, this was an enigma. Ryan was also our miracle baby. He was born premature and saved from death's door more than once as an infant. We were convinced that God must have a special plan for Ryan. Like his brothers, he went to church from an early age, and he loved it. He loved music, and to this day we love watching old home videos of him singing Christmas carols. He was baptized as a young boy, and his path was made straight, we thought. But Ryan would not follow that path. You know, free will is a funny thing. As much as we want our children to follow a certain path, and we guide them as best we know how, they have a mind and a will of their own. Ryan became our prodigal son. He openly rejected the path that Lori and I had so carefully tried to plant in him. His priorities were his friends and his music, and he was determined to make his own way. Now, all 3 of our boys loved music and played in bands, but to Ryan, it was an obsession. He was going to be a rock star. And towards the latter years of high school, much to our chagrin, his band started playing in bars and clubs. Trying to be supportive, Laura and I would attend some of these shows. At one particular venue, his band was playing music with lyrics that I found offensive. I was angry, I was hurt, I'm embarrassed. I remember saying to him, if that's the kind of music I'm going to hear when I come to your shows, I'm not coming anymore. I ended up eating those words. A friend of mine gently pointed out to me that my son needed to know that I loved and supported him. I was dangerously close to burning bridges. And if the prodigal did want to return home, it would be more difficult for him to do so if he felt that I did not love and support him. I recanted my threat. Ryan moved out of the house after high school, but things in our relationship got worse. At a family gathering at Thanksgiving, we were playing some table games, and Ryan let loose with some language that I found particularly offensive. I found myself yelling one of those things that my dad said, "Not under my roof, you don't." Things were tense. The family was uptight. Days later, Jonathan, playing peacemaker, came to me and said, "Ryan doesn't think that you love him as much as the other boys. He says he feels like he's the black sheep of the family. More pain, more guilt. Where did I go wrong?" Remarkably, it was Ryan that made the first move towards reconciliation. He said he wanted to meet with me. Said he wanted to talk about his feelings. I am so glad I didn't burn that bridge. We had a terrific healing moment, and I was able to reaffirm my love for Ryan, but more importantly, I think that he believed me. The meeting also helped me to see just how much we are alike. Despite all of our butting heads over the years, we have more in common than I'd ever realized before. We're both artists, determined to make our living in what we love. And I learned that he truly does respect me. It was a mountaintop sort of day. Ryan has gone on to have some great success with his music career, and I'm proud of him. Oh, he's still my prodigal when it comes to the faith. And I want him to know that just like the father in that famous story, I'll come running to greet him the day that he returns home. Now, I know I'm not alone in this. If I were to ask how many of you have kids or know kids that were raised in the church but after leaving the home no longer attend, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't be the only one with my hand raised. Studies indicate that there are great numbers of our kids in this category. Theories about this are complex. Many see the church as being too exclusive, too legalistic, too old-fashioned, too political. They see the church being known more for what it's against than what it's for. Attempts to try to make the church more hip by changing music styles and dress codes and serving lattes in the lobby has not been the answer for those who have left the church. As one author put it, we're not leaving the church because we don't find the cool factor there. We're leaving the church because we don't find Jesus there. And indeed, many make a definite distinction between Jesus and the church. As author Dan Kimball so succinctly put it in his book titled, they like Jesus, but not the church. Raise up a child in the way that he should go, and when he's old, he will not depart from it. As I struggle to believe that, I also have to be prepared for the fact that the way that he should go may look a lot different than it did to me when I was young. These stories aren't finished yet. Hope. There is hope. I've never been so miserable as when I became a Christian. There's a phrase you don't hear every day. One, you're not likely to hear spoken in most churches. I mean, the party line is give your heart to Jesus and he'll give you the desires of your heart, right? We're promised a bill of goods that says once we become a Christian, all of our troubles will be over. Does anybody really believe that? I mean, really, don't get me wrong. I do believe that faith in Christ is the answer to life's big questions. But maybe you've heard the joke about the child in church who's asked by the teacher, what's gray and furry, has a bushy tail, likes to climb trees, and eats nuts? The child replies, well, teacher, it sounds like a squirrel, but since this is church, I'm going to say the answer is Jesus. While Jesus may indeed be the answer to life's big questions, sometimes the answer to a small question just might be a squirrel. The idea that our troubles magically disappear once we become a follower of Christ is a lie. One that I'm ashamed to say I used to believe and at one time even spread. You know, just like those phrases that we hear from our parents that are passed down over the years, we can be embedded with some bad theology from a very early age. I'm in right, outright, upright, downright, happy all the time. Or, I've got the joy, 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 joy down in my heart to stay. That all sounds good until we realize we're not happy all the time. And the joy in our heart doesn't stay. And if we have doubts, well, the assumption is we never really had Jesus in our heart to begin with. My son Liam, my youngest son, was our easiest to raise. You probably heard the adage that you make all your mistakes with your firstborn, and after that, the rest are easy, right? Your youngest is always your baby, even when fully grown. And our baby was easygoing and compliant. He received less discipline than his brothers, rarely got into trouble. Maybe mom and dad finally got it right with number 3. Huh? Truth is, watch out for the quiet ones. You never know what they're thinking. I should know. I was a quiet one. Hard to believe, I know. We weren't naive with Liam. I mean, after all, we were the parents of the kids who threw the infamous house party. But we didn't realize until more recently that Liam was living a double life, and had been for years. The model child at home and at church was anything but that when mom and dad weren't watching. And since he did such a good job of being the model child, we watched very little. Now, Liam was our lover boy, the Casanova of the family, and almost always had a girlfriend. Now, if we were smart, that should have been our first clue. Some of these girlfriends, not all, but some, well, let's just say he didn't meet them in church. But since he did such a good job of being the model child, we just thought he was practicing evangelism. The really odd, weird, kind of cool thing is that one of these girlfriends actually evangelized him. After high school, Liam was drifting, well, to be honest, he was drifting long before that, drifting from his faith and from some of the values we'd so carefully tried to plant in him, until a certain young lady actually helped to turn him in the right direction. Now, I'd always heard as a kid that repentance was like walking in one direction, away from God, and then abruptly turning and walking towards God. Liam had changed in a remarkable way. He was baptized in the Willamette River one hot August afternoon and spoke eloquently at the event about how he had not been pursuing God, but that God had pursued him. As his parents, we could not have been prouder. He really was a changed person. I mean, he became the closest thing to a monk of anybody I've ever seen. I mean, he would literally spend hours every day on his knees, reading his Bible and praying. Lori and I would have these moments when we would look at each other and then ask God, who is this kid? And what have you done with Liam? In the weeks that followed, Liam made the decision to attend a Bible school in Germany for a 6-month intensive study course of the scriptures. We were excited for him and couldn't be happier at the direction his life was taking. It wasn't until Liam left for Germany that we began to get indications that everything was not as it seemed. The emails that we received from Liam indicated that he was in a deep, dark struggle. It was then that we heard the phrase, "I've never been so miserable as when I became a Christian." Liam was in a dark place trying to find peace and joy in a newfound faith, struggling and failing. He told us that he'd actually had feelings of depression for years, but now it was worse. We thought he might be clinically depressed. We urged him to go see a doctor to get tested, but he refused. He was convinced that this was a spiritual problem, and he was going to rely on God to heal him. Liam finished up his studies at the top of his class and returned home a sad, miserable, and depressed young man. We thought that Bible school would fix him. I mean, a heavy dose of Jesus and the Bible, and Liam would come home and eventually become the next Billy Graham. Instead, we got back a kid who seemed worse after Jesus than before. Liam came to the same conclusion. After giving his all to Christ, he felt that God had let him down. There was no peace, no joy, and this new life was no life at all. He stopped trying. He gave up on God. Now, I know you're sitting there waiting for the next big turn in the story, the big miracle, the big climax will have us saying, "To God be the glory." So am I. I'm still waiting. Liam eventually did go to see a doctor, got tested, was diagnosed with depression, given some medication. He is much happier now. That's the good news. The diagnosis came after Liam had given up on God, and at this time he appears to be done with him. He's happier now, and pursuing God only reminds him of his miserable struggle. I'm not saying he's not saying that he doesn't believe in God. He just doesn't care for him very much. You know, I sort of feel like Abraham must have felt when he was asked by God to sacrifice Isaac. He obeyed God, took his son up the mountain to sacrifice him. I'm there, looking for that lamb the Lord will provide. He is there, just waiting to be discovered. Hope. There is hope. You know, it's only natural. You think about your life as a father, you think about your own father. You look back, you reflect. My dad passed away in the summer of 2007. I'd like to share some thoughts that I wrote about him as I prepared a eulogy for my father. On the surface of things, I would say that my dad and I weren't very much alike, like night and day, rather than two peas in a pod on the surface of things. He was mostly quiet, didn't usually have much to say. I make my living with words, mostly spoken. My dad was shy. I'm not, at least on the surface. My dad was a stay-at-home kind of guy. Me, let's just say that Rambling Man could be my theme song. And while we're both men of faith, his was a quiet faith, while mine is, at least on the surface because of my profession, a public faith. We're very different, no question, even in appearance. He was short and I'm tall. In facial features and mannerisms, I tend to favor my mother more than my father. And yet if we look behind the curtain in my theatrical vernacular or dig a little deeper in his working man vernacular, we are very much alike. There have been those moments through the years when I look in the mirror and I see my dad looking back. Sometimes the face I see causes a negative reaction. I don't want to see him when I look at myself. It's a flashback to that phase in life I think all kids, especially boys, go through in finding themselves. That streak of independence that says, I'm not like my father, that's striving to be your own man. But as I'm reflecting on my dad now that he's left this life, I'm realizing just how much we are alike. And I may have more in common with him than I ever realized before. I think it was my dad who first taught me how to get attention, a trait that I would eventually turn into a career. My dad loved a good, practical joke. And one of my earliest memories of him as a prankster was through the simple yet time-tested device known as a handshake buzzer. He loved the reaction and the attention of that simple prank. My response to this playfulness was to emulate it. I loved the surprise, the laughter, the attention. Could it be that this tiny seed of mischief that was so entertaining to me was the seed that launched my career on stage? Thank you, Dad, for showing me the power of laughter and surprise, all because of a handshake buzzer. And there's more. My dad worked for years as a farmer, loved horses and being outdoors. My dad knew the meaning of hard work, the hard, back-breaking, sweaty, often smelly kind, the kind that I try very hard to avoid. But I admire my dad's work ethic. While I don't care much for physical labor, I don't mind hard work, partially because I found a profession that I truly enjoy. But I do think I learned the value of hard work from my dad. I also admire him greatly, knowing that he was able to provide well for his family, having only a grade school education. My dad was a rock for my mom and for his kids and beyond. He was there for his extended family, caring for both blood and in-laws in his home for many years. And while I don't have a lot of specific memories of his response to his daughter and my sister Loretta's death, struck down by a car at the age of 5, I do know that he pulled his family through that crisis. He lived a sacrificial life for the sake of his family, to which I can only aspire. Well, I've made the point of him being a man of few words. He did choose some of them very well. Every son pines for the approval of his parents, whether he wants to admit it or not. My mother never hesitated and let us know her sentiments, and I never questioned her approval. Got much encouragement from her over the years, but Dad, well, that was a different story. I think he had a hard time understanding me and my world. I think there was a part of him that always thought that one day I'd give up this acting thing and get a real job. And yet, I'll never forget a special moment we shared shortly after I started the touring performer life. I just performed with my acting company at our family church. He cornered me on the basement steps at home and said, "Son, your mom and I were a little leery when you went off to California to become an actor. I thought it was a mistake. But after seeing what you did tonight, I'm proud of you." I don't think he ever said he was proud of me before or since. But I have never forgotten those words. Being a man of few words, it must have been difficult for him to say them. We didn't often say gushy things to each other, being guys and all. Even later in life, I would tell him that I loved him. He would say those words back, but only after I said them first. I've strived to be more expressive to my own kids in my love and appreciation of them because of that moment. Thanks, Dad. While I still hold to the fact that I'm not my father, and we are very different in so many ways, I'm at peace with the part of him that's in me. When I look in the mirror, get a laugh from the audience, When I find myself saying the blessing before the meal and realize I'm repeating the exact same words that my father taught me to pray, I'm proud to say that I'm my Father's son. I could do worse, a whole lot worse. I have this vision of my Father arriving in heaven. He is greeted by St. Peter. He holds out his hand to Peter and says, "Pull my finger." At that moment, all of heaven knows that Mr. Neighbors is in the house. My dad is presented with a beautiful white steed. He promptly takes off at a gallop and pulls to the stop beside a little girl named Loretta. He reaches down and gently places her in front of him on the horse, and they go off on the ride of their lives. Enjoy your ride, Dad. I miss you. As I said to the friend who challenged me to write this presentation, these stories aren't over yet. Oh, the kids are grown and out of the house. The roof over their head is no longer one that I provide. Ryan and Liam both live in Portland, Oregon, and are pursuing careers in the music industry. It's a tough career path, and they'll struggle for a while to keep a roof over their head. My son John has not abandoned the faith, but it looks different on him than it did on me, and I'm learning to adapt to that. He's married to a wonderful woman named Mallory. They live in Bethesda, Maryland, where Mallory is a Navy nurse. And Jonathan's pursuing a career as a freelance photographer. And I have one granddaughter, Lucy. And I'm looking forward to these years as a grandfather and hearing my boys say some of the things that their dad said. My duties as a father are not what they used to be. I don't get to say, "Go ask your mother," as often as I used to. Today, my job is more in the area of finding times to visit, making sure they remember their mother's birthday and Mother's Day, giving advice, but only when asked, loaning money, and prayers. Lots and lots of prayers. Communication today is more by text message and email rather than a visit or a phone call. I don't like it so much, but hey, I'll take what I can get. How's the weather? I'll ask your mother. Give a hug from Granddad. I hope you remember some things that I said. I'm proud of you. Love from Dad.
So awesome to have Chuck with us this morning and sharing some of those stories from his life, and hope you guys enjoyed that. Hope you catch up with him afterwards. He's going to be out in the courtyard after service. If you're visiting Horizon for the first time this morning, we're really glad you're here. We hope you enjoyed it. We hope you'll visit us again next weekend. Our senior pastor, Bob Bottsville, will be back next weekend. But if you are visiting for the first time, we'd love to meet you at the welcome table, straight out through the front doors. If you don't know me, my name's Stephen Patterson. I'm one of the pastors on staff, and I get to oversee the missions ministry, and we're excited for another Mexico trip coming up on February the 6th. We'd love to have you join us on that trip if you'd like. But it's awesome to be part of the missions ministry here at Horizon and see so many of you take part in what the Lord is doing around San Diego County and down in Mexico and all across the world. And Chuck has had the privilege of partnering with a great organization, and they have a table out in the courtyard, and he's been able to see how the Lord's worked around the world in the Dominican Republic and other countries. And so I'm going to invite him back out to share with you a bit about what he does as one of their ambassadors, and encourage you to take part in that as well. So can we welcome Chuck back out to the stage? Thank you.
First, I'd like to say again how great it's been to be with you this morning. You know, I still haven't found a way to send my Brussels sprouts to Africa. But I have found a way to make a difference, a huge difference in some of the lives of some of the poorest of the poor on this planet. And I had the opportunity recently to go with, how many of you are familiar with Food for the Hungry? A few of you are. How many of you sponsor a child? You got a picture on your refrigerator of some spouse? Thank you. Thank you for what you're doing. Studies have indicated that this sponsorship thing really does work. It really does make a difference. So I thank you for what you're already doing. But I went to the Dominican Republic last year and got to see some of the work up close and personal that they're doing there and meet one of our sponsored children. We're going to watch a video. It's just a couple minutes long. After that video, I'll tell you a little bit more, but let's watch the video now.
The Dominican Republic is one of those countries, it's a tourist destination for a lot of Americans. And you look at pictures and you see beautiful beaches and lush areas, and it's true. You come here, there is so much beauty, and there's beauty in the architecture of the old city, but then you travel off of the beaten path where the people actually live, and the contrast is startling. What it would be like to be a parent and to know that that was the condition that I was trying to raise my own children in. Yeah, one of the communities that we visited, we drove in as far as we could drive in our vehicle, and then we had to walk, and you get up to the top of the hill and here's a little community and they don't have clean water. To get water they have to walk that same hill we just came. We take that for granted. We drink water out of the tap and bottled water and everything, water everywhere. In a lot of these communities, that's something that is a precious commodity that they don't have. And Food for the Hungry is providing ways for them to have clean water on a daily basis. We sponsor a child here in La Mina, and her name is Crystal. What we met was a gorgeous little child. I was a little nervous, a little apprehensive, this is our first time to meet, but just fell in love with her in just the few minutes that we had together to get to know her a little bit, know a little bit about her family. I am now a part of this child's life, and there's a relationship there now. And I'm looking forward to communicating with her and writing to her and just being a part of her life. When you sponsor a child like Crystal, you're helping not only that child, but you're helping that child's family and the entire community where that child lives, with the hope that they can totally transform that community so that sponsorship is no longer even needed. It's just such a rewarding thing to be a part of a process like that is changing lives on that level.
It was great to meet Crystal, to step into her world, to be reminded once again just how blessed we are in this country. You have no desire how good we have it until you see the kind of poverty that a child like Crystal lives in. I want to invite you today to be a part of that process of changing lives in children like Crystal. One of the things I didn't mention in the video I want to make sure you understand is that Food for the Hungry is definitely a Christian ministry, and they purpose that the children that are sponsored also have an opportunity to respond to the gospel. And indeed, in the communities that we visit, 100% of those kids were involved in classes where they're learning about Jesus, learning about the Bible, having that opportunity to respond. One of the things that really impacted me the most on this particular trip was meeting Carlos, the young man that traveled with us and who was our translator. And he shared with us his testimony, how he himself had been a sponsored child. And he's gone on to get a complete college education and now come back and working with Food for the Hungry in the exact same community where he grew up. And he shared with us that it was through his sponsor's influence that he came to faith in Christ. His sponsor sent him a Bible translated in his own language, and the letters and communication that followed, he turned his life over to Jesus. So I want you to know that even though the name of the organization is Food for the Hungry, it's about so much more than food. It's about totally transforming these communities and giving these children an opportunity to meet our Lord and Savior. So I want to really encourage you to consider stepping into that process and helping some of these kids. It costs $35 a month to sponsor a child with Food for the Hungry. You break that down, that's just a little over $1 a day. A cup of coffee at McDonald's, if you will, or a quarter of a cup at Starbucks. Something that's within reach for many of us, and please understand, I'm not standing up here trying to give anybody a guilt trip. That's not what this is about. But if you're having one, take it to the table in the courtyard. I'll be very happy to help you do something about it. Here's a little girl whose name is Chantel, who's from Rwanda. She's 10 years old. Her birthday's coming right up on February the 1st. When you sponsor Chantel, you're going to be helping with such things as food, clothing, healthcare, education, things that we take for granted every single day. I'll just close with one other thought. You know, the Bible tells us that the poor will be with us always. I have no doubt about that. But knowing that doesn't let us off the hook. The Bible reminds us over and over and over again to remember the poor. And I simply ask you, how are you personally doing that? I'll tell you that I didn't do a very good job of it. Oh, I might put money in the offering plate for a special appeal from time to time, but I didn't consistently, on an ongoing basis, remember the poor. Sponsorship's given me a way to do that. My wife and I sponsor 5 kids, and I've had a chance to meet 3 of those kids firsthand to see how their lives have changed. But if funny things happen along the way, God's done a work in my heart through remembering the poor. He's changed me, I think, for the better. I'm pretty confident He may just do that for you as well. So come on back and talk to me. Sponsor one of these kids today. Thank you so much for letting me share. God bless. Have a great day.